Tropical development in the Coral Sea, severe weather building across Cape York, extreme heat warnings for Western Australia with temperatures approaching 50 degrees. That is what we were tracking today. Let us get straight into it. The tropical situation across northern Australia is heating up in more ways than one. We've got multiple systems to monitor, and one of them is shaping up to be particularly interesting as we head towards the weekend. Right now, conditions across the country are showing that classic summer divide. Up in far north Queensland, it's been hot and sticky all week. Darwin S sitting in that typical build-up pattern, humid and waiting for the monsoon to really kick in. Meanwhile, down in Tasmania, overnight minimums have been dipping below zero in some spots. That contrast is about to become very relevant as we track these tropical systems. First, let S focus on what's happening in the Gulf of Carpentaria and the Coral Sea. We've got two distinct areas of low pressure that are about to interact in a way that could produce some significant weather. Tropical low 17U is currently sitting over Mornington Island in the Gulf. It's a compact system, relatively well organised for its current intensity. Over the next couple of days, this one is forecast to track east across the Cape York Peninsula before emerging into the Coral Sea around Thursday. Now, here S, where it gets interesting. The Bureau of Meteorology is monitoring this system closely because as it crosses Cape York, we're re-expecting conditions to deteriorate significantly for communities in the Torres Strait and the Northern Peninsula. This isn't your typical weak tropical low behaviour because this is a monsoonal system. It's enhancing the westerly flow across the region in a way that could produce borderline cyclonic conditions even before it develops any further. What does that mean in practical terms? Sustained winds between 60 and 80 kilometres per hour, gusts potentially reaching 100 kilometres per hour, particularly closer to the centre of low pressure. Heavy rainfall measured in the hundreds of millimetres. For communities around Thursday Island and the Torres Strait, this could feel like a weak tropical cyclone, even though it hasn't been classified as one. The heaviest rainfall is forecast to begin tomorrow morning and persist through Wednesday into Thursday. If you are in this part of the country or you've got family or mates up there, now is the time to make sure preparations are in place. Secure loose items around properties. Make sure you've got supplies for a few days. Don't to travel unless absolutely necessary. Now, once this system emerges into the Coral Sea on Thursday, the forecast becomes both more interesting and more uncertain. All four major forecast models are now showing a similar pattern for the latter part of the forecast period. The Access model, the GFS, the ICON, and even the European model are all suggesting this system will intensify as it moves out into the Coral Sea, potentially reaching tropical cyclone status by the weekend. But here S, the unusual part. Instead of the typical track where systems move away to the southeast and dissipate or curve away towards New Zealand, we're seeing consistent model guidance showing a U-turn. The system is forecast to head southeast initially, then curve back towards the southwest, potentially bringing it back towards the Queensland coastline, somewhere between Rockhampton and Cairns by early next week. Now, I want to be very clear about the confidence level here. This is unusual behaviour for a tropical system in this part of the world. It's not unheard of, but it is certainly not common. The steering flows in the upper atmosphere do appear to support this scenario, with a ridge of high pressure building over the Tasman Sea that could funnel the system back towards the coast. But we're talking about a forecast period 7 to 10 days out, and a lot can change. What I'm saying is this: if you are on the Queensland coast from Mackay North, this is worth paying attention to over the coming days. Don't panic. Don't make drastic changes to your plans just yet, but do keep an eye on the official forecast from the Bureau of Meteorology. If this scenario does eventuate, you'll have plenty of warning to prepare. The other aspect worth noting is the nature of this system. Because it's monsoonal in origin, the weather impacts are likely to be concentrated on the northern and eastern side of the circulation. The southern and western flanks tend to be drier and less windy with these types of systems. So even if it does approach the coast, the immediate coastline may not cop the worst of it. The heaviest rain and strongest winds would likely be offshore or on the outer side of the system. But again, this is all subject to change. The forecast models have been struggling with this setup, and the interaction between the multiple systems across northern Australia adds another layer of complexity. Speaking of which, let's talk about the other area of interest in the Indian Ocean. Tropical low 16U is currently located to the west of the top end, roughly west-southwest of Darwin. This system had a lot of people concerned a few days ago because the forecast models were suggesting significant development and a potential track towards the Western Australian coast, possibly affecting the Pilbara or Kimberley regions. The situation has changed substantially. Over the past 48 hours, wind shear has absolutely decimated this system. If you're not familiar with the term, wind shear refers to a change in wind speed or direction at different levels of the atmosphere. Strong wind shear essentially tears apart the structure of a developing tropical system, preventing it from organising and intensifying. That's exactly what happened here. The convection, the thunderstorm activity that fuels these systems, has been stripped away from the centre of circulation and pushed off to the east. The system is now in a very unfavourable environment for development. As of this morning, no forecast model is showing significant development from tropical low 16U. The threat to the Western Australian coastline from this particular system appears to have passed. However, and this is important, I wouldn't be declaring the all clear for the Pilbara and Kimberley just yet. The long-range signals still suggest tropical cyclone activity is possible during the last week of January into the first week of February. It just might not come from this specific system. There are indications of another area of low pressure potentially developing south of Christmas Island later this month, and the monsoon trough could spawn additional systems near the top end or Kimberley region. So if you in Western Australia, particularly the northern coast, stay alert. The immediate threat has diminished, but the cyclone season is far from over. Now let's shift our attention to what is happening right now across other parts of Queensland and New South Wales. The monsoon trough is also driving shower and thunderstorm activity through the eastern parts of Queensland today. This afternoon, we're re-looking at the potential for storms to develop across the Darling Downs, through the southeast Queensland region and down into parts of northeastern New South Wales. Some of these storms could be severe. The ingredients are there: moisture from the tropical north, instability from the surface heating, and enough upper level support to generate some solid cells. If you're in Brisbane, the Gold Coast, the Sunshine Coast or the Toowoomba area, keep an eye on the radar this afternoon. Storms could pop up quickly with gusty winds, heavy rain and possibly small hail. The good news is that these are typical summer afternoon storms. They can be intense, but they tend to move through relatively quickly. The main concern is localised flash flooding if a storm decides to sit over one area for an extended period. For those who have been waiting for rain, particularly around Brisbane and the southeast, conditions have been patchy this summer. Some areas have missed out on decent falls, while others have copped plenty. That's the nature of thunderstorm rainfall. It's hit and miss. Today, setup suggests another round of that lottery. If a storm passes over your suburb, you might pick up 20 to 40 millimetres. If it misses, you'll be left watching it rain 2 kilometres away. New South Wales is also seeing continued shower activity, particularly along the coast and ranges. This is linked to the same moisture feed from the tropical north. Nothing severe expected, but enough to keep things damp across the Hunter, Central Coast and Sydney regions. Now, I need to spend some time on what's happening in Western Australia because this is genuinely concerning. The Pilbara region is about to experience one of the most extreme heat waves we've seen this summer. And given that this part of Australia is one of the hottest places on Earth during January, that is saying something. Today, temperatures across the inland Pilbara are forecast to reach 48 to 49 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow, we could see maximums approach 50 degrees in some locations. There is even the possibility of 51 degrees being recorded at 1 or 2 spots. To put that in perspective, a 44 or 45 degree day in this part of WA is on the upper side of normal for summer. 47 degrees is a genuinely hot day, something you might see 4 or 5 times a year at most. Anything above 48 degrees is a once-a-year type event. And once you start approaching 50 degrees, you are in serious trouble. And here's what people sometimes don't appreciate. The difference between 47 degrees and 50 degrees feels much more significant than a 3-degree change might suggest. Your body is already struggling to cope at 47. By 50, you are in a situation where simply being outside for an extended period can be dangerous. The Bureau of Meteorology has issued an extreme heatwave warning for the Pilbara region, and that S, not something they do lightly. My advice, and I am not one for dramatic warnings, but this is important. If you travelling through the inland Pilbara over the next few days between Karratha and Port Hedland, or through the interior, reconsider your travel plans. If you absolutely must travel, make sure your vehicle is in good condition. Carry more water than you think you will need. At least 10 litres per person minimum. Have a means of communication if you break down. Travel during the cooler parts of the day, if possible, early morning or evening. If your vehicle breaks down in 50-degree heat, out on one of those remote stretches of road, you can be in a life-threatening situation within hours. Dehydration and heat stroke can set in remarkably fast. This is not an exaggeration. For those of you who live in the region and are used to hot conditions, you know the drill. Stay indoors during the heat of the day. Keep hydrated. Check on elderly neighbours and anyone who might be vulnerable. Keep an eye on pets and livestock. Make sure they have access to shade and water. The extreme heat is forecast to persist through Tuesday and Wednesday before easing slightly towards the end of the week. Even then, we are still talking about maximums in the mid-40s. Relief is relative in this part of the world. Now let's wrap up with a look at the broader picture for the coming week. The monsoon trough will remain active across northern Australia, which means tropical activity will continue to be a focus. The system crossing Cape York is the main concern in the short term, with the potential for development in the Coral Sea later this week. Keep an eye on that one. Eastern Australia will continue to see shower and thunderstorm activity, particularly during the afternoons. Nothing unusual for this time of year, but always worth monitoring for severe cells. Western Australia faces extreme heat in the north and relatively dry conditions across the south and west. Perth and the southwest are looking at a fairly typical summer week, warm but not extreme. Tasmania and Victoria are enjoying a bit of a break from the heat that affected them last week. Conditions are settling down with mild to warm temperatures and generally fine weather expected. South Australia is in a transitional phase. Adelaide and surrounds are looking at warm conditions, but nothing extreme. The interior will be hot, as always, during January. For those keeping track at home, the Indian Ocean dipole remains in a neutral phase, which is one of the reasons we're seeing this active monsoon pattern across the north. La Nina conditions have weakened but are still influencing our weather patterns, contributing to above average moisture across the eastern states. The outlook for the remainder of summer suggests continued tropical activity with the potential for further cyclone development across both the Coral Sea and the eastern Indian Ocean. We're right in the heart of cyclone season now, and while it's been a relatively slow start to the season, the signals suggest things could become more active as we head into February. All right, that covers the main points for today. The key takeaways: Cape York and the Torres Strait should prepare for severe weather over the next few days. Queensland East Coast from Mackay north should monitor the potential Coral Sea development with interest but not alarm. Western Australia Pilbara region faces dangerous heat that requires sensible precautions. And the rest of the country continues with typical summer conditions. If you've got mates or family in any of the affected areas, give them a call. Make sure they're aware of what S coming. That S, often the most valuable thing we can do during weather events like this. Stay safe, stay prepared, and keep an eye on the official forecasts from the Bureau of Meteorology for the latest updates. Before I go, let me touch on a few additional points that might be relevant depending on where you are. For those in far north Queensland who might be dealing with that monsoonal system crossing Cape York, remember that these events can bring prolonged impacts. It is not just about the initial passage of the system. The rainfall can continue for days as the monsoon trough remains active in the region. Creeks and rivers that look manageable on day 1 can become serious flood risks by day 3 or 4. If it's flooded, Forget it. That's the rule. Road closures are common during these events, particularly in Cape York and the Gulf country. If you're relying on road access for supplies or travel, now is the time to stock up. Wait until the weather deteriorates. Peninsula Developmental Road and other key routes can become impassable quickly, and they can stay that way for days. For the fishing and boating community, conditions in the Coral Sea are going to be marginal to dangerous over the coming week. The system we're retracking will generate significant swell and rough seas, even if it doesn't directly impact the coastline. The Great Barrier Reef region will see increasing winds and deteriorating conditions from Thursday onwards. If you've got trips planned, check the marine forecasts carefully. Reschedule if there's any doubt. The reef will still be there next week. On the Western Australian heat situation, I want to emphasise the importance of looking after those who might not be able to look after themselves. Elderly residents, particularly those living alone, are at significant risk during these extreme heat events. If you've got a neighbour or family member who fits that description, check in on them. Make sure they staying cool and hydrated. Sometimes people are reluctant to use air conditioning because of electricity costs, and that reluctance can have serious consequences in conditions like this. Workers in outdoor industries across the Pilbara face particular challenges. If you managing crews or working on sites in the region, follow the heat safety protocols. Adjust work schedules if possible. Ensure adequate water is available. Know the signs of heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Taking a break in the shade is always preferable to dealing with a medical emergency. For livestock and pastoral operations in the affected areas, make sure animals have access to shade and water. Stock that are already stressed from heat can deteriorate quickly. Move them to sheltered paddocks if possible. Top up water troughs more frequently than usual. Losses during heat waves like this can be significant if precautions aren't taken. Looking at the bigger picture for the rest of summer, we're in an interesting phase of the season. The monsoon has been active, which means continued tropical cyclone risk through February and into March. For those who remember Cyclone Yasi back in 2011 or Cyclone Larry in 2006, those were both February systems. The peak of cyclone season across Queensland is actually late January through early March. So while we've had a relatively quiet start to the season, that doesn't mean we should let our guard down. The same applies to Western Australia. Many of the most destructive systems in WAS history have occurred in February and March. We're in the heart of the season now. Being prepared isn't about panicking over every forecast model run. It's about having a plan, knowing your risks, and being ready to act if a genuine threat develops. That means having your emergency kit sorted, knowing where your nearest evacuation centre is, having a communication plan with family members. All right, I've gone on long enough. The weather across Australia over the coming week is going to require attention across multiple fronts. The tropics are active, the heat in the west is extreme, and the usual summer storm season continues across the east. Stay informed, stay prepared, and look after each other. That's it for today. I'll have more updates as the situation develops.